I am David, and I am 30 years old. Exactly 6 years ago, my father stood at a microphone in front of 240 guests at my older brother's wedding reception and essentially told the world I was God's mistake. While I was sitting right there, trying to swallow down the dry chicken they served to the unimportant guests, my own flesh and blood said, God gave us 2 boys. He was being generous with one of them. 240 people laughed. They roared. My brother laughed. My mother covered her mouth, her eyes crinkling with absolute delight. But there is one thing they did not know. They had absolutely no idea that the son they treated like a disposable piece of trash would spend the next 6 years building an empire in complete silence. They had no idea that when their perfect golden child finally shattered into a million pieces, losing his salary, his marriage, and his mind, I would be the only man on earth with the power, the money, and the real estate to save him from total ruin. And now, the very same people who laughed at me are the ones begging for my mercy. Before I tell you exactly how I brought my family to their knees without ever raising my voice, hit that like button if you believe that karma never misses an address. And do me a favor, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Let's go back to the night my family broke me for the very last time. It was June 14th. The humidity in Cincinnati was thick, the kind that makes your suit stick to your shoulders before you even step inside the venue. The wedding was held at the Cincinnatian Hotel downtown, a place that screamed old money and suffocating expectations. My parents had dropped $60,000 on this single evening. I knew the exact dollar amount because my mother, Eleanor, made sure to casually mention it at least 5 times whenever I was in earshot. It was her way of reminding me of the family's wealth, a wealth I was firmly excluded from. My invitation had arrived with a sticky note slapped on the front in my mother's sharp cursive. It read, "You are at table 11. Dress accordingly." I had driven 3 hours from Columbus, where I was working a miserable entry-level job just to keep a roof over my head. I bought a dark blue suit on clearance at a department store, tailoring it myself using a YouTube tutorial and a cheap sewing kit in the parking garage before the ceremony. I walked into that grand ballroom and found table 11. It was shoved all the way in the back, so close to the swinging kitchen doors that every time a waiter pushed through, I was hit with the smell of industrial dish soap and steamed asparagus. It was the absolute wrong end of the room. I was seated with Courtney's deaf great-aunt who kept calling me Daniel, a coworker of my dad's who smelled like gin and regret, and 2 of Arthur's law school buddies who completely ignored my existence. The toasts began right on schedule. Courtney's father gave a short, warm speech. The best man told a mildly inappropriate joke about a lawsuit that got a polite chuckle. And then my father, Richard, stood up. My dad is a man who knows how to work a room. He has this booming, broadcaster voice that demands attention. He tapped the microphone, looked out over the sea of expensive dresses and tailored tuxedos, and then he looked at Arthur. He looked at my brother like Arthur had personally hung the moon and the stars in the sky. 31 years ago, my dad started, his voice dripping with pride. Eleanor and I started a family. We had a plan. We had a vision for the future. And then Arthur arrived, and he exceeded every single expectation we ever possessed. The room erupted into applause. My mother wiped a theatrical tear from her eye. Tonight, my dad continued, pacing slightly, soaking in the admiration, I am watching my son marry the love of his life, and looking at this fine young man, I can honestly say before all of you today, God gave us 2 boys. He was being generous with one of them. He delivered it like a master comedian landing a punchline. The timing was flawless, and the reaction was instantaneous. Laughter, deafening, rolling, genuine laughter from 240 people. I sat frozen at table 11, gripping my water glass so hard I thought the crystal would shatter in my hand. Every person in that room understood the joke. Every person in that room knew I was the other boy, the defective one, the throwaway son. I looked at the head table. Arthur was shaking his head, chuckling warmly. My mother was beaming. They were laughing at me. The applause lasted for a full 12 seconds. I counted them in my head because my chest was caving in, and I needed something, anything, to anchor me to reality. I did not scream. I did not flip the table. I simply set down my napkin, pushed my chair back, and walked straight out the kitchen exit. I grabbed my keys from the valet, tipping him a $5 bill I could barely afford, and headed for the parking garage. I heard her heels clicking on the concrete before I heard her voice. David, David, stop walking right now. I turned around. My mother was standing there, not looking concerned, but deeply annoyed. Her perfect makeup was completely unbothered. Where on earth do you think you're going? She demanded. I'm leaving, I said. My voice sounded hollow, like it belonged to a ghost. You cannot leave. It is your brother's wedding. Stop throwing a tantrum. Dad just told 200 people I was God's mistake, I said, staring right into her eyes, looking for a shred of maternal defense. There was none. She rolled her eyes and crossed her arms over her silk wrap. Oh, please. It was a toast. He was being funny. He was working the crowd. Why do you always have to be so incredibly sensitive? He humiliated me into a microphone, Mom. David, she snapped, stepping closer, her tone dropping into that icy register she used when she wanted to crush an argument. Your brother is getting married. This isn't about you. It has never been about you at his events. Stop trying to ruin his night. It has never been about you. She did not say it to hurt me. She said it because, in her mind, it was simply a factual statement. It was the truth of my entire existence. You're right, I said quietly. I turned around, got into my car, and shut the door. She did not tap on the window. She just turned on her heel and marched back inside to the party. I drove for 3 hours straight back to Columbus in complete silence. I did not turn on the radio. I just gripped the steering wheel, watching the highway lines blur together. When I walked into my cheap apartment, I pulled out my phone. 0 missed calls. 0 text messages. Nobody noticed I was gone. Nobody cared. Sitting on the edge of my mattress, I opened my contacts. I blocked my father's number. I blocked my mother's number. I blocked Arthur. I blocked aunts, uncles, and family friends. I logged into social media and deleted every trace of the Whitfield family from my digital life. I severed the cord. I thought the worst part of my life was finally over. I was so incredibly wrong. To understand how easy it was for me to walk away that night, you have to understand the architecture of the house I grew up in. The Whitfield residence at 2214, Crestwood Drive, was a stunning red brick colonial with a manicured lawn that my father mowed in perfect diagonal stripes. From the sidewalk, we were a Christmas card family. Behind the heavy oak doors, we were a corporate hierarchy, and I was perpetually the unpaid intern. Arthur was born in 1993. I came along 2 years later. But in my parents' eyes, the timeline stopped the moment Arthur took his first breath. He was the golden child. He was handsome, athletic, and naturally gifted at academics. I was quieter, more analytical, and prone to asking difficult questions that made my parents uncomfortable. The division of worth in our family was mapped out every Sunday at 6 o'clock during dinner. We had a massive mahogany dining table. My father sat at the head. Arthur sat immediately to his right in the seat of honor. My mother sat across from Arthur, and I sat at the very far end of the table, closest to the hallway door, practically leaning out of the room. It was as if I had been physically positioned for easy removal. I used to keep a green spiral notebook hidden under my mattress. When I was 14, I started tracking data because numbers felt safer than feelings. Numbers did not lie. Over 6 months, I tracked how many times my father addressed Arthur directly during dinner compared to me. The ratio was roughly 11 to 2. I tracked how many times my mother interrupted my sentences to ask Arthur if his food was hot enough. 17 times in 1 month. When it came time for college, the disparity stopped being emotional and became purely financial. The college fund was supposed to be split. That was the lie I was fed growing up. But when Arthur applied to schools, my parents hired private tutors. My mother flew with him to tour Georgetown, Notre Dame, and Michigan. When he decided to go to law school, my dad cashed out a massive chunk of investments to ensure Arthur graduated completely debt-free. When my turn came, I was handed a reality check. I asked my mom if she could review my personal statement for my application. "I trust you to handle it, David," she said, not even looking up from her iPad as she picked out curtains for Arthur's new premium off-campus apartment. She had not read a single piece of my writing since I was in the 4th grade. I filled out my financial aid forms alone on a laptop with a broken hinge that I had bought from a pawn shop. I took out federal loans. I worked a soul-crushing job at a campus mailroom, and then I worked night shifts at Walmart just to cover my textbooks and rent. Every time I asked for help, the answer was always the same tight-lipped response from my father. "Arthur is in law school, David. We have priorities right now. You need to learn how to pull your own weight." So I did. I pulled my own weight right out of their lives. The 6 years following the wedding were brutal, but they were mine. I moved from Columbus down to Austin, Texas. I changed my phone number. I went to therapy every single Tuesday at 4 p.m. with Dr. Hayes. He was a brilliant, no-nonsense therapist who helped me dig out the toxic programming my parents had installed in my brain. I learned that my value was not tied to a seat at a mahogany table. I threw myself into the tech industry. I started as a low-level analyst, but I was hungry. I worked 80-hour weeks. I taught myself coding, systems architecture, and healthcare data compliance. By my late 20s, I had founded my own health tech firm specializing in private medical data management and high-end rehabilitation infrastructure. We scaled rapidly. I took the company public. My salary skyrocketed. I started acquiring commercial real estate. I built an empire in complete silence, surrounded by a chosen family of friends and colleagues who respected me for my mind, not my genetics. I was whole. I had patched the holes in my foundation. I went months without even thinking about Crestwood Drive. Then, on a rainy Tuesday evening in March, my personal cell phone buzzed on my kitchen counter. It was a text from an unknown number. I almost deleted it, but the area code was 513, Cincinnati. I opened the message. It was from my cousin Leo. He was one of the few relatives I hadn't completely blocked, mostly because he had been overseas in the military during the wedding fallout. The text was 3 words. "He needs you." My stomach dropped. I stared at the screen, my heart pounding against my ribs. 5 minutes later, my phone rang. It was Leo. I answered it. "David," Leo's voice was grim. "I know you haven't spoken to them in years. I wouldn't call if it wasn't an absolute nightmare. It's Arthur. He's going to die if somebody doesn't step in." I walked over to my window, looking out at the Austin skyline. "What happened?" "Everything," Leo sighed heavily. "His wife, Chloe, she left him last year. Total divorce bloodbath. But that's just the tip of the iceberg. Arthur is drinking, David. Not just a little. He's drowning. He lost his job at the law firm months ago. He's facing a potential malpractice lawsuit because he showed up to a deposition completely wasted. He's about to lose his condo." I gripped the phone tightly. Where are Richard and Eleanor in all of this? Why aren't they putting him in rehab? Leo let out a bitter laugh. "Your parents? They are busy running damage control. They are telling everyone at the country club that Arthur is taking a spiritual sabbatical to do consulting work. They refuse to admit he's an addict because it ruins the family image. They just keep paying his rent and pretending everything is fine while he rots in his apartment." The anger that I thought I had buried 6 years ago flared up instantly, hot and sharp. My parents were willing to let their golden child drink himself into an early grave as long as the neighbors didn't gossip about it. "Why are you calling me, Leo?" I asked, my voice dangerously calm. "I have no place in that family." There was a long pause on the line. "Because Arthur asked for you," Leo said quietly. I stopped breathing. "I went over to his place yesterday," Leo continued. "It's a disaster zone." But he was crying, "David. He asked why you never answered his calls. He thinks you hate him." "I never got a single call from him," I said firmly. "I changed my number 2 weeks after the wedding. But before that, my phone never rang. I don't know what to tell you, man. But he is broken. And your parents are going to let him die to save face." I hung up the phone. I stood in the dark of my penthouse for a long time. My mind raced. I could stay here. I could ignore it. I owed them absolutely nothing. But Dr. Hayes had taught me something crucial. You don't save people because they deserve it. You save them because of who you are. I called my executive assistant, Elena. Elena, clear my schedule for the next 4 days. Have the corporate jet prepped for a flight to Cincinnati tomorrow morning. And pull up the portfolio for our Oasis rehabilitation centers in the Midwest. I might need a VIP suite. The storm was just beginning. Before I flew out, I needed to know the exact layout of the battlefield. I am not a man who walks into a negotiation blind. I paid a top-tier private investigator in Ohio to pull the public records on Arthur's divorce and any pending civil litigation. Within 12 hours, the dossier was sitting on my iPad as I flew at 30,000 feet toward Cincinnati. What I read made my blood run cold. This wasn't just a tragic story of a man falling into addiction. This was a slaughter. Arthur's ex-wife, Chloe, had played the ultimate victim card to the family, claiming Arthur's drinking drove her away. But the financial records told a very different, highly calculated story. Chloe hadn't just left. She had systematically bled him dry first. 6 months before the divorce was filed, she had convinced Arthur to transfer the bulk of his liquid assets and his 401k into a joint trust that heavily favored her in the event of a separation. She had hired a shark of a lawyer, claimed emotional distress, and walked away with a massive settlement, leaving Arthur with the mortgage on a luxury condo he could no longer afford because his law firm had already put him on unpaid leave. But here was the twist that made me want to punch a hole through the window of the jet. My parents knew. According to the emails my PI legally obtained through a court clerk leak regarding a custody dispute over their dog, my father had advised Arthur to settle quietly. Richard had explicitly told Arthur not to fight Chloe in court because Chloe's father was a prominent judge in the county. My father sacrificed his own son's financial future and mental sanity just to avoid a messy, public trial that would make for bad gossip at the HOA meetings. They threw Arthur to the wolves to protect their precious social standing. When the plane landed, I didn't go to my parents' house. I rented a black SUV and drove straight to Arthur's condo complex. It was a high-end building downtown, the kind with a doorman and marble floors. I bypassed the front desk and took the elevator up to the 4th floor. The hallway smelled like expensive room freshener, but the moment I stood in front of Unit 4C, a different smell leaked through the doorframe. Stale alcohol, rotting takeout, and unwashed clothes. I knocked. Nothing. I pounded my fist against the heavy wood. Arthur, it's David. Open the door. I heard shuffling. The deadbolt clicked, and the door opened exactly 2 inches, held by the security chain. A sliver of a face peered out. I almost didn't recognize my own brother. The Arthur I knew was meticulous. He ironed his shirts. He wore expensive cologne. The man staring back at me through the crack was a ghost. His eyes were bloodshot and sunk deep into dark, bruised sockets. He hadn't shaved in weeks. He was terrifyingly thin, his collarbones jutting out of a stained gray sweatshirt. "David?" he croaked. His voice was raw, like he had been swallowing glass. "Take the chain off, Arthur," I commanded. My voice left no room for debate. His trembling fingers fumbled with the metal chain. The door swung open. The luxury condo was a graveyard. Trash bags were piled in the kitchen. Empty liquor bottles, cheap vodka mostly, cluttered the expensive glass coffee table. The blinds were tightly drawn, suffocating the room in a depressing, gray twilight. I stepped inside, my expensive shoes crunching on a broken piece of plastic. I didn't sit on the couch. I stood right in the center of the living room and looked at the ruin of the golden child. Arthur slumped against the wall, sliding down until he was sitting on the hardwood floor, pulling his knees to his chest. He looked up at me, tears instantly welling in his red eyes. "You came," he whispered, wiping his nose with the back of his sleeve. "I didn't think. I thought you hated me." "I did," I said truthfully, looking down at him. "For a long time, I hated you. I hated the toast. I hated that you laughed. I hated that you never stood up for me." Arthur squeezed his eyes shut, a sob tearing from his throat. I'm sorry. David, I am so sorry. I was a coward. I was always a coward. I crouched down so I was at eye level with him. Leo said you tried to call me after the wedding. Is that true? Arthur nodded frantically. Yes, 2 days after the wedding. The guilt was eating me alive. I picked up my phone to call you, to apologize, to tell you Dad was out of line. But when I went to your contact, the number was blocked. I tried calling from Courtney's phone, but it went straight to a disconnected message. I thought you had blocked me completely. I thought you were done with me. I went completely still. Arthur, I didn't change my number until 2 weeks after the wedding. I blocked Mom and Dad that night. I didn't block you until a week later. Arthur looked at me, confused, his alcohol-addled brain trying to process the timeline. But my phone said, and then the pieces snapped together in my mind with terrifying clarity. Arthur? I said slowly, the rage bubbling up like acid in my throat. Who had your phone the morning after the wedding? Arthur blinked, his hands shaking. Mom. She took my phone to upload the photos from the reception to a shared drive. She had it for a few hours. My mother, Eleanor, she hadn't just told me I was too sensitive. She had deliberately gone into Arthur's phone, found my contact, and blocked my number before he even had the chance to wake up and feel guilty. She engineered the silence. She orchestrated the estrangement to ensure the golden child wouldn't be distracted by the messy emotions of the throwaway son. For 6 years, Arthur thought I abandoned him, and I thought he didn't care. All because of a few taps on a touchscreen by a woman who wanted a picture-perfect family. I stood up. The air in the room suddenly felt incredibly thin. Get a bag, I told Arthur, my voice eerily calm. What? Get a duffel bag. Pack enough clothes for a week. You are leaving this crypt. David, I can't. I don't have anywhere to go. The firm fired me. Chloe took the savings. Mom and Dad. He choked on a sob. Mom and Dad said I just need to rest at home. They said rehab is for criminals. Mom and Dad are the reason you are sitting on the floor waiting to die. I snapped. You are going to a medical detox center, and then you are going to a residential facility. And I am paying for it. Arthur looked up at me, bewildered. You? David, residential care costs tens of thousands of dollars. You work an admin job. He had no idea. He was still living in the narrative my parents had spun 6 years ago. Just pack the bag, Arthur, I said, pulling out my phone. I stepped out into the hallway to dial Elena. Elena, we are moving to phase 2. Secure a private transport for Arthur to the Oasis facility in Vermont. I don't want him in Ohio. Get the medical team ready for a full physical and psychological evaluation upon arrival. Understood, David, Elena replied efficiently. What about your parents? Oh, I'm going to see my parents right now, I said, looking at the numbers on the elevator panel. I'm going to rip the roof off their perfectly manicured house. I drove Arthur to Crestwood Drive. He sat in the passenger seat, trembling, sweating through his shirt as the withdrawal symptoms began to claw at his nervous system. When my rented SUV pulled into the driveway, crossing over the pristine diagonal stripes of the lawn, the front door opened before I even cut the engine. My mother, Eleanor, stood on the porch, wearing a cashmere cardigan, her face a mask of furious disbelief. My father, Richard, stepped out behind her, his jaw set in a hard, intimidating line. I got out of the car. I walked around, opened the passenger door, and helped Arthur out. He could barely stand. What in God's name are you doing here? My mother hissed, rushing down the steps. She didn't look at Arthur's sunken face. She looked at the neighbor's windows, terrified someone might be watching. Bring him inside immediately. People will see him like this. I guided Arthur up the steps and into the grand foyer. The house smelled exactly the same. Lemon polish and superiority. Sit on the bench, Arthur, I instructed gently. He collapsed onto the cushioned entryway bench, burying his face in his trembling hands. I turned to face my parents. Hello, Richard. Eleanor, I said, using their first names. felt incredible. How dare you come into my house after 6 years and cause a scene? My father barked, stepping into my personal space to use his height against me. It didn't work. I didn't flinch. We are handling Arthur's situation privately. You aren't handling anything? I fired back, my voice echoing off the vaulted ceiling. You are hiding him. You advised him to roll over and let Chloe rob him blind so you wouldn't have to face Judge Lawson at the country club. And then you blocked my number on his phone the morning after the wedding. My mother's face drained of color. She took a step back. I don't know what you are talking about. Do not lie to me, I said, pointing a finger at her. You engineered a 6-year estrangement because you couldn't handle the narrative getting messy. You isolated him. And now he is an alcoholic on the verge of liver failure. He just needs time to rest, my mother argued, her voice shrill. It's a phase. He is stressed. Just then, Aunt Vivian walked out of the kitchen. She had apparently been visiting. Aunt Vivian was my mother's sister, a quiet woman who had always lived in Eleanor's shadow. She looked at Arthur, then at me, and her face crumpled. Eleanor, stop it, Vivian said, her voice shaking. My mother whipped around. Vivian, stay out of this. No, Vivian cried out, taking a step toward me. David needs to know. He needs to know what you did. My father moved to intervene, but I held up my hand, glaring at him. Let her speak. Aunt Vivian looked at me, tears spilling over her cheeks. 3 years ago, when Arthur first started drinking heavily after the firm put him on probation, he wrote to you. He wrote 3 letters, David. Handwritten letters begging for your forgiveness. Asking for your help because he knew you were the only one who understood how suffocating this house is. My heart stopped. Where are the letters? Vivian pointed a shaking finger at my mother. She found them in his briefcase, and she burned them in the fireplace. I watched her do it. She told me that Arthur was just being dramatic, and she couldn't allow him to humiliate himself before a failure like you. The room plunged into absolute silence. The only sound was Arthur's ragged breathing from the bench. I looked at the woman who gave birth to me. I looked at the fireplace in the living room. I didn't yell. The rage I felt transcended yelling. It was a cold, clinical, terrifying focus. You burned his letters, I stated. It wasn't a question. Eleanor lifted her chin, trying to regain her regal composure. I was protecting him. You would have just used his vulnerability to mock him. You have always been jealous of his success. His success. I let out a dry, humorless laugh. I gestured to the trembling, broken man on the bench. Look at his success, Eleanor. He is bankrupt and dying. My father stepped forward. Enough. You don't get to march in here and judge us. If you are so concerned about your brother, then step up and do something about it. We have looked into a state-subsidized rehabilitation program in Dayton. It's affordable, but Arthur's credit is ruined. Since you seem to care so much, you can co-sign the loan for his treatment. We've spent enough of our retirement savings keeping his condo afloat. I stared at him. They were millionaires. They had millions tucked away in stock portfolios and offshore accounts. But because Arthur was no longer their shiny trophy, they were trying to dump him into a cheap, underfunded state facility. And they wanted me, the son they thought was a broke admin assistant, to take on the debt. I didn't argue. I didn't reveal my hand. I pulled my phone from my pocket and looked at my watch. It was 3 p.m. Fine, I said smoothly. My parents blinked, surprised by my sudden capitulation. You want me to take financial responsibility for Arthur's recovery? I asked, looking directly into my father's eyes. I will do it, but we do this formally. Tomorrow at noon. Have your lawyer Leo and Uncle Robert here. We will sign the custody and medical power of attorney paperwork. I will take full legal and financial control of Arthur's care. My father smirked, clearly thinking he had won. Glad to see you're finally taking some responsibility, David. We will see you tomorrow at noon. I turned, helped Arthur to his feet, and walked him out to my car. As I drove him to a secure, private hotel suite to wait out the night with a hired private nurse. I called Elena. Elena, tomorrow at noon. I want the entire legal team on standby. I want the transfer papers for full medical proxy ready. And Elena, yes, David, call Dr. Sterling. Tell him to meet me at Crestwood Drive tomorrow. Tell him to wear his best suit. We are going to perform a little surgery on my family tree. I thought they had broken me, but all they did was forge me into a weapon. And tomorrow I was going to detonate. The next morning, the sky over Cincinnati was a brilliant, deceiving blue. I left Arthur at the hotel under the strict supervision of a private, round-the-clock nursing staff I had flown in from Chicago. His withdrawal was severe, manifesting in violent tremors and cold sweats, but he was medically stabilized. For the first time in years, my brother was safe. Now, it was time for me to handle the architects of his destruction. I pulled my rented SUV up to 2214 Crestwood Drive exactly at noon. I did not park on the street. I parked right in the center of the driveway, forcing anyone else to maneuver around me. I wore a bespoke charcoal suit, the kind of tailoring that does not rely on flashy logos but speaks volumes through the precision of the cut. I walked up the brick steps and opened the front door without knocking. I knew the code to the electronic lock. They had never bothered to change it, probably because they never expected me to return. I stepped into the foyer. The house was quiet, but I could hear the murmur of voices coming from the formal dining room. I walked down the hallway, my footsteps heavy and deliberate on the hardwood floor. When I entered the dining room, I was greeted by a scene that looked entirely staged. My father, Richard, sat at the head of the massive mahogany table. My mother, Eleanor, sat to his left, wearing an immaculate pearl necklace, her posture rigid. To my father's right sat Uncle Robert, a man whose entire personality revolved around bragging about his local real estate investments and his golf handicap. Next to Robert was my cousin Leo, the same Leo who had texted me the day before. Leo gave me a tight, sympathetic smile that I immediately recognized as entirely fake. And there, sitting at the very end of the table near the kitchen door, was a single empty chair. Table 11 all over again. David, my father said, gesturing to the empty chair with a silver pen. Have a seat. We have a lot of paperwork to get through. I did not sit. I walked over, pulled the heavy wooden chair away from the table, and pushed it against the far wall. Then, I walked back and stood directly across from my father, planting my hands flat on the polished mahogany. We do not need to sit, I said, my voice steady, carrying the low resonance of a man who controls the room. Present the terms. My father narrowed his eyes, clearly irritated by my refusal to play my assigned role. He tapped a thick manila folder on the table. As I explained yesterday, Richard began, adopting his best corporate negotiation voice, Arthur is in a vulnerable position. His divorce completely wiped out his savings. The malpractice lawsuit from his former firm has essentially made him unemployable in the legal sector for the foreseeable future. We have consulted with our lawyer, and the consensus is that a state-subsidized facility in Dayton is the most practical option. Practical for who? I asked flatly. Eleanor chimed in, her tone dripping with false maternal concern. David, we have to protect the family's assets. Your father and I have our retirement to think about. We cannot liquidate our portfolios just because Arthur made some poor lifestyle choices. We already lost a significant portion of his inheritance to that woman Chloe during the settlement. Uncle Robert leaned forward, interlacing his fingers. Look, David, we all know you have been living a quiet life down in Texas. Leo tells me you do some sort of administrative data work. That is fine. Honest work. But you are 30 years old. You probably just got your first real promotion. You do not understand the complexities of wealth management. Taking on a loan for Arthur's rehabilitation is the right thing to do. It builds character. I looked at Leo. You told them I do administrative work? Leo shifted uncomfortably in his chair. Well, I tried to look up your company online, man. I couldn't find a website with your name on it. I just figured you were a mid-level manager somewhere. There is no shame in a modest salary. There was no shame. The irony was so thick you could cut it with a knife. Leo could not find my name because my assets and my company were shielded behind a highly secure corporate holding trust. I did not boast on LinkedIn. I owned the platform's top data compliance contracts. So, let me ensure I have the facts straight, I said, looking at each of them. You are sitting in a house fully paid for, worth over $2 million. You have untouched college fund accounts that you never let me use. Yet, you want to send your golden child to a severely underfunded state facility where he will share a room with court-ordered violent offenders, simply because you do not want to dip into your luxury vacation fund. And you want me, the son you banished to the kitchen end of the table, to co-sign a high-interest loan to pay for it. We are giving you a chance to be part of this family again, David, my father said, his voice rising, attempting to assert dominance. This is a legal document giving you limited financial proxy. You sign it, you secure the loan, and we will handle the logistics of getting him into the Dayton facility. It is time you pulled your weight. He slid the documents across the table. A cheap, generic power of attorney form printed off the internet, and a loan application from a predatory lending bank. I looked at the papers. I did not touch them. I told you yesterday I would take full financial and legal responsibility for Arthur, I said quietly. Excellent, Uncle Robert said, slapping the table. Good boy. But, I continued, cutting Robert off completely, I will not be signing your paperwork, and Arthur is not going to Dayton. He is going to Oasis Residential Recovery in Vermont. My mother gasped. Oasis? David, do you have any idea how much that costs? That is a luxury medical facility. It costs $30,000 a month. You cannot afford that on an admin salary. You will bankrupt yourself, and then you will come crying to us for a bailout. I am not taking out a loan, I said. My father stood up, his face flushing red. Then how the hell do you plan on paying for it? Because I am telling you right now, my checkbook is closed. If you think you can walk in here and dictate terms with money you do not possess, you are delusional. I checked the gold watch on my wrist. It was exactly 12:15. I am not asking for your money, Richard, I said. I am simply waiting for my team. Right on cue, the heavy brass knocker on the front door echoed through the house. The sound of the door knocker froze everyone in the room. My mother shot a nervous glance toward the hallway, likely terrified that the neighbors were stopping by to ask uncomfortable questions. Who is that? My father demanded. That would be my legal counsel and the attending physician, I replied, turning away from the table. I will let them in. I walked to the front door and opened it. Standing on the porch were two people. Elena, my executive assistant, looking flawless in a sharp navy blazer, holding a sleek leather briefcase. Next to her was Dr. Harrison Sterling. Dr. Sterling was a titan in the American medical community, a frequent guest on national news networks discussing addiction recovery, and the chief medical director of the Oasis Network. Good afternoon, David, Elena said professionally. Mr. Chairman, Dr. Sterling said, giving me a respectful nod. Come in, I instructed, stepping aside. I led them back into the dining room. The atmosphere in the room shifted instantly. My father, who prided himself on recognizing power and status, immediately identified Dr. Sterling. His posture straightened, and he quickly buttoned his suit jacket. Dr. Sterling? My father said, his voice dropping its aggressive edge, replaced by a fawning country club charm. Richard Whitfield, it is an absolute honor. I have read your publications on neurological trauma. I had no idea my son managed to secure a consultation with you for his brother. Please sit. My father extended his hand across the table. Dr. Sterling did not take it. He did not even look at my father's hand. He looked entirely at me. David, the private medical transport is fueled and waiting at the regional airport, Dr. Sterling reported, his voice crisp and authoritative. We have secured the primary VIP isolation suite at the Vermont campus. I have personally reviewed Arthur's charts from the hotel nurse. He is stable enough for the flight. We are ready to move whenever you give the authorization. My father stood there, his extended hand awkwardly hovering in the air. He slowly pulled it back. Wait, private transport? VIP suite? Dr. Sterling, there must be a misunderstanding regarding the billing. We are looking into state facilities. Elena stepped forward. She placed her leather briefcase on the mahogany table, snapping the brass locks open with a sharp, satisfying click. There is no misunderstanding regarding the billing, Mr. Whitfield, Elena said smoothly, extracting a stack of thick, legally bound documents. All expenses for Arthur Whitfield's transport, medical detox, residential stay, and subsequent outpatient care are being covered in full by the Whitfield Foundation for Medical Advancement. Uncle Robert laughed nervously. The Whitfield Foundation? What is that, some kind of charity grant? It is a private philanthropic trust, Elena corrected him, her eyes cold and professional. Funded entirely by the CEO and majority shareholder of Horizon Health Technologies. Leo frowned, leaning over the table to look at the documents. Horizon Health? That is a multi-billion-dollar tech firm. They own the data infrastructure for half the hospitals in the country. What does that have to do with David? I stepped forward, picking up the silver pen my father had been pointing at me earlier. It has everything to do with me, Leo, I said, my voice dangerously soft. Because I built Horizon Health. I own it. And Horizon Health owns the Oasis Rehabilitation Network. The silence that fell over the dining room was absolute. It was the kind of silence that creates a ringing in your ears. My father stared at me, his mouth slightly open, the gears in his mind grinding to a violent halt as he tried to process the information. You own Oasis? I own the facilities. I own the transport companies. I own the real estate they sit on. I clarified, tossing the pen onto the table. It clattered loudly against the polished wood. While you were busy advising Arthur on how to hide his assets from a divorce lawyer, I was acquiring medical infrastructure across North America. While you were burning Arthur's letters in your fireplace to protect your fragile ego, I was taking a company public. My mother gripped the edge of the table, her knuckles turning bone white. David, this cannot be true. You left here with nothing. You had student loans. You worked at a mailroom. I did, I replied, looking down at her. And then I drove to Texas, went to therapy to unlearn every toxic lie you ever told me. And I worked 80 hours a week to ensure I would never have to rely on a single person in this room ever again. I turned to Elena. Present the proxy. Elena slid a bound document directly in front of my father. This is a full, irrevocable medical and legal power of attorney, Elena stated, tapping the signature line. It transfers all decision-making authority regarding Arthur's healthcare, financial recovery, and housing directly to David. It strips you of any legal right to interfere with his treatment, contact his doctors, or access his medical records. My father stared at the paper as if it were a venomous snake. I am his father. I am his next of kin. I am not signing away my rights to my own son. I leaned over the table, placing both hands flat on the documents, bringing my face inches from his. I did not yell. The time for yelling was years ago. Now I delivered absolute, undeniable reality. You will sign it, Richard? I whispered, the steel in my voice cutting through the room. Because if you do not sign it, I will instruct my corporate legal team to file a massive civil lawsuit against you and Eleanor for gross negligence and financial endangerment regarding Arthur's estate. I have the emails you sent him advising him to hide assets during his divorce, which constitutes fraud. I will subpoena your country club friends. I will subpoena Aunt Vivian to testify about the burned letters. I will drag your pristine reputation through a public courtroom, and I will make sure your name is printed in every local newspaper from here to Columbus. My father stopped breathing. The threat of public humiliation was his ultimate kryptonite. I had found his throat, and I was pressing down. Sign the paper, I commanded. My father's hand trembled. He looked at Uncle Robert for support, but Robert was staring at his shoes, suddenly extremely interested in the floorboards. Leo was completely pale, realizing he had just mocked a billionaire. Slowly, defeated, my father picked up the silver pen. His hand shook so badly he could barely form the letters. He signed his name. Eleanor, weeping silently, took the pen next and signed beneath him. They had surrendered the golden child. The moment the ink dried on the legal documents, the power dynamic in the room permanently inverted. For 30 years, Richard and Eleanor Whitfield had operated under the delusion that they were the ultimate authority, the judges of worth and value. In the span of 20 minutes, I had systematically dismantled their empire and replaced it with my own. Elena neatly gathered the documents, placing them back into her briefcase with a final, echoing snap. Dr. Sterling gave me a brief nod, signaling that our business here was concluded. "We will see you at the airstrip, Mr. Chairman," Dr. Sterling said respectfully, turning and walking out the front door, Elena trailing right behind him. I stood alone in the dining room with my family. The atmosphere was heavy, suffocating under the weight of their shattered pride. My mother suddenly stood up. The cold, calculating woman from yesterday vanished, replaced by a frantic, desperate version of a mother I had never known. She rushed toward me, her arms outstretched, a watery, pleading smile plastered on her face. "David, my sweet boy," she cried out, her voice trembling with manufactured affection. "We are just so incredibly proud of you. Look at what you have accomplished. Your father and I always knew you had this potential inside you. We were just pushing you to be your best. That is all we ever wanted. We can put this all behind us now. You are home." She reached out to grab my arm. I stepped backward, moving entirely out of her reach. Her hands grasped empty air. "Do not touch me, Eleanor," I said, my voice devoid of any warmth. Her arms dropped to her sides. The fake smile shattered. "You were not pushing me," I told her, making sure every word landed with devastating precision. "You were discarding me. You burned letters from a dying son because you could not stand the thought of him asking for help from the son you deemed worthless. You told Arthur I abandoned him. You sat back and laughed while my father humiliated me at a wedding reception. Do not dare stand there and try to rewrite history just because you saw a balance sheet." My father cleared his throat, trying to salvage whatever shred of dignity he had left. He adjusted his tie, refusing to look me in the eye. "David, there is no need to be vindictive. You proved your point. You are successful. But you have to understand our position. Managing family wealth and public perception is complicated. We made some errors in judgment, yes, but we are still a family." "No, Richard," I corrected him. "You share genetic material. That is the extent of our relationship." I turned to Uncle Robert, who had been suspiciously quiet. "And Robert, do not bother having your son submit his resume to Horizon Health. I saw the application come through my desk last week. It was rejected. We require competence, not nepotism." Robert's face turned a violent shade of purple, but he kept his mouth shut. I walked toward the hallway. Before I reached the door, I turned back one final time. They were all standing around that massive mahogany table, looking small, pathetic, and entirely powerless. "Arthur is leaving for Vermont in an hour," I announced, laying down the final law. "He will be in residential care for a minimum of 90 days. You are legally barred from contacting the facility. If you attempt to call, the staff will hang up. If you attempt to visit, my private security team will have you escorted off the property for trespassing. When Arthur is sober and ready, he will decide if he ever wants to see you again. But as of this moment, you have lost the privilege of being his parents." "You cannot keep my son from me?" my mother wailed, finally dropping the act, pure venom lacing her words. "I already did," I replied. I walked out the front door, leaving it wide open behind me. I walked down the brick steps, got into my SUV, and drove away from Crestwood Drive without checking the rearview mirror a single time. 6 months later, the air in Austin was crisp, carrying the cool promise of a Texas November. I was standing in the massive, open-concept kitchen of my house, carving a turkey. The smell of roasted sage and garlic filled the air. It was Thanksgiving. The dining table behind me was not mahogany. It was a beautiful raw-edge walnut table I had custom-built by a local artisan. It was completely round. There was no head of the table. There was no foot of the table. Everyone who sat there was an equal. Sitting at that table was Marcus, my loyal friend from college who had driven 3 hours to sit with me the night I cut my parents off. Beside him was Elena, who had politely declined her own family's chaotic dinner to share a quiet meal with us. Dr. Hayes, my therapist, was there with his husband, arguing good-naturedly with Marcus about a recent football game. And sitting directly across from me, pouring a glass of sparkling apple cider, was Arthur. He had completed his 90 days at Oasis and transitioned into a sober living community I helped establish in the Austin suburbs. The physical transformation was miraculous. He had gained 30 pounds of healthy weight. The dark circles under his eyes were gone, replaced by a clarity and a quiet humility I had never seen in him before. He wasn't the golden child anymore. He was just a man putting the pieces of his life back together. He had recently secured a job as a paralegal at a nonprofit legal aid clinic, working for a fraction of his old salary, but doing work that actually mattered. Later that evening, after the plates were cleared and the others had moved to the patio, Arthur and I stood by the kitchen island, washing dishes. "You know," Arthur said quietly, scrubbing a roasting pan, "I owe you an apology." "You have apologized a dozen times, Arthur. You are sober. That is the only apology I need." "No, not for the drinking," he said, turning off the water and leaning against the counter. He looked at me, his expression grave. "In therapy last week, I realized something. When Mom and Dad blocked your number on my phone, I found out about it 2 days later. I went into the blocked list and saw your name. I stopped drying the wine glass in my hand. I looked at him, letting him speak. I saw it," Arthur admitted, his voice thick with shame. "And I could have unblocked it. I could have called you. But I didn't. I was a coward, David. I was so terrified of Dad's anger, and if I am being completely honest, a part of me was jealous of you. I was jealous that you had the courage to walk out of that wedding and escape the cage. So, I left the number blocked. I let them tell the story that you abandoned me, because it was easier than standing up to them. I am so sorry." He looked down, fully expecting me to unleash my anger. I set the towel down on the counter. I looked at my brother. I didn't feel the burning rage of the past. I just felt a profound sense of peace. "I know, Arthur," I said gently. "I figured that out a long time ago. We were both victims of the same house. They just put you in a nicer cage. You are here now. That is what matters." Arthur looked up, tears shining in his clear eyes. He nodded once, a deep, settling acceptance passing between us. As for Richard and Eleanor, the justice they received was poetic. They were not financially ruined, but they lost the only currency they truly valued: their social standing. Aunt Vivian, disgusted by the revelation of the burned letters, refused to keep their secrets. She told everyone in their affluent social circle exactly what happened. The story spread like wildfire through the country club. My parents became pariahs. The dinner party invitations stopped arriving. People crossed the street to avoid them at the grocery store. They are currently living in a massive, silent, $2 million house, completely alone, surrounded by photographs of a family that no longer exists. They occasionally try to send letters or gifts to my corporate headquarters. Elena shreds them immediately. The boundary is absolute steel. Let's pause for a moment. Thank you for staying with me this far. You're truly amazing. Please help me by liking the video and commenting the number 1 below so I know you've been here with me until this point. This not only helps more people discover this story, but also lets me know that my experiences mean something to someone. Your support is the greatest motivation for me to keep sharing the rest of this journey. If you are listening to this right now, and you find yourself sitting at table 11 in your own family, if you are the one they talk over, the one they dismiss, the one they treat as an afterthought, I need you to hear this loud and clear. The edge of their table is not the edge of the world. You do not have to beg for a seat where you are not respected. You have the power to stand up, walk out the door, and build your own table from scratch. Blood makes you related, but loyalty, respect, and unconditional love make you a family. Never let anyone, not even your parents, dictate your worth. Have you ever faced something similar with your own family? Share your story in the comments below, and don't forget to like and subscribe so you don't miss the